What if everything you believed about the golden age of Hollywood was built on lies? What if behind those dazzling smiles and perfect movie moments existed a world of cruelty and abuse that would shock you to your core? Sally Field has finally decided to break decades of silence and expose the truth about 6 men who terrorized Hollywood while the world celebrated them as heroes. These revelations will forever change how you see classic cinema and the stars you thought you knew. Before we dive into video, subscribe to our channel. Sally Field is a name that commands respect in Hollywood. With over 50 years in the entertainment industry and 2 Academy Awards proudly displayed in her home, this woman has earned the right to speak her truth. She has worked alongside legends and witnessed behavior that ranged from questionable to absolutely horrifying. For years, she remained quiet like so many others because speaking out meant risking everything. But now at this stage of her life, she has decided that protecting the reputations of dead men is less important than telling the truth to a world that deserves to know what really happened behind the glamorous facade of old Hollywood. Number 1. Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds is the first actor Sally Field exposes, and her testimony about him comes from painful personal experience. Burt Reynolds was one of the biggest stars of the 1970s and 1980s with that trademark mustache and cocky grin that made millions of fans swoon. Sally dated him for several years during the peak of both their careers, and what she experienced during that relationship left scars that took decades to heal. According to Sally, the charming persona that Burt showed the world was nothing like the man he became behind closed doors. She describes him as deeply insecure and jealous of her success, to the point where he would actively try to sabotage her confidence and her career. When Sally won her first Oscar for Norma Rae in 1980, it should have been one of the happiest nights of her life. Instead, Burt made it all about himself and his feelings of inadequacy. He could not celebrate her achievement because in his mind, her success meant his failure. Sally talks about how he would belittle her acting choices and make her feel stupid for the roles she wanted to take. He needed to be the center of attention at all times, and when she shined too brightly, he would find ways to dim her light. The emotional manipulation and control he exerted over her during those years was a form of abuse that Sally only fully recognized years later after the relationship ended. She speaks about this now not to drag his name through the mud, but to help other women recognize the signs of emotional abuse in their own relationships before it destroys their sense of self-worth. Number 2. Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock is the second name on Sally Field's list. And while she never worked with him directly, she heard enough stories from other actresses to know that his behavior was monstrous. Alfred Hitchcock is considered one of the greatest directors in the history of cinema. His films are studied in universities and celebrated at film festivals around the world. But his treatment of the women who starred in his movies reveals a dark and disturbing pattern of behavior that the industry chose to ignore because of his genius status. Hitchcock had a habit of becoming obsessed with his leading ladies, and when they did not return his romantic or sexual interest, he would turn their working lives into nightmares. The most famous example is Tippi Hedren, who starred in The Birds and Marnie. She has spoken publicly about how Hitchcock sexually harassed her and made inappropriate advances that she repeatedly rejected. When she refused to give in to his demands, he sabotaged her career by refusing to release her from her contract, while also refusing to cast her in anything. He essentially held her hostage professionally and destroyed her chance at becoming a major star because she would not sleep with him. Sally emphasizes that Tippi Hedren was not the only victim. There were other actresses who experienced similar treatment but were too afraid to speak about it. The culture of Hollywood at that time protected powerful men like Hitchcock and blamed women for the harassment they endured. If an actress complained, she was labeled as difficult or ungrateful and found herself blacklisted from the industry. Hitchcock used his position of power to prey on vulnerable women, and the entire industry enabled him because his films made enormous amounts of money. Number 3. John Wayne. John Wayne is the third actor Sally Field calls out, and her revelations about him focus on his racism and misogyny that were barely hidden during his lifetime. John Wayne was the ultimate American hero on screen. He represented strength and courage and traditional values in dozens of westerns and war movies. But according to Sally and many others who knew him, his personal beliefs and behavior were absolutely reprehensible. John Wayne was openly racist and gave interviews where he defended white supremacy and opposed civil rights for Black Americans. He believed that Native Americans deserved to have their land stolen and that segregation was the natural order of things. His treatment of women was equally backwards and harmful. He believed women existed to serve men and should never challenge male authority. On film sets, he would refuse to treat actresses as equals and expected them to defer to him in every situation. He created hostile working environments for anyone who did not share his narrow worldview and used his immense power and popularity to ensure that people who challenged him faced professional consequences. Sally points out that John Wayne never hid these views. He stated them publicly in interviews and in his choice of roles. Yet Hollywood continued to celebrate him and make him rich and famous because his movies made money. The industry cared more about box office receipts than about the harm his beliefs and behavior caused to marginalized people. His legacy as an American icon is built on a foundation of hatred and bigotry that should not be forgotten or excused. Number 4. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby is the fourth name Sally Field reveals, and the contrast between his public image and his private behavior is truly shocking. Bing Crosby played friendly priests and loving fathers in his movies. His smooth voice and easygoing manner made him one of the most beloved entertainers of his generation. But behind the doors of his own home, he was a violent and abusive father who terrorized his children. His son, Gary Crosby, wrote a memoir called Going My Own Way, where he detailed the physical and emotional abuse that he and his siblings suffered at their father's hands. Gary described brutal beatings and constant psychological torment that left lasting damage on all the Crosby children. Sally Field emphasizes that people in Hollywood knew about this. They knew that Bing Crosby was beating his kids, and yet the studios continued to cast him in roles as the perfect father figure. The disconnect between image and reality was one of the most disturbing aspects of the old Hollywood system. Studios invested enormous resources in creating and maintaining false images of their stars. They employed fixers and publicists, whose job was to cover up any behavior that contradicted the carefully crafted personas. So Bing Crosby could go home and brutalize his children, and then show up on set the next day to play a gentle, loving dad, and everyone pretended not to notice. The complicity of the entire system allowed abusers like Crosby to continue harming their families while being celebrated as role models. The psychological damage he inflicted on his children followed them throughout their lives and contributed to tragic outcomes for several of. Number 5. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis is the fifth actor on Sally Field's list, and her revelations about him focus on his treatment of women and his cruel behavior disguised as comedy. Jerry Lewis was one of the most successful comedians in Hollywood history. His films made hundreds of millions of dollars, and his annual telethons for muscular dystrophy raised enormous amounts for charity. But according to Sally and numerous other women who worked with him, Jerry Lewis was a nightmare who used his status as a comedian to sexually harass and humiliate women with impunity. He apparently thought it was hilarious to make inappropriate sexual comments and touches, and then claim he was just joking if anyone objected. Multiple actresses and female crew members have described working environments where Jerry Lewis made them feel unsafe and degraded. He would play cruel practical jokes that were really just excuses to embarrass and hurt people who could not fight back without risking their jobs. His entire comedy persona was built on being childish and harmless, but that image gave him cover to engage in behavior that was anything but harmless. Sally emphasizes that this pattern continued for decades because Hollywood protected him. His movies made money and his telethons generated positive publicity, so the industry looked the other way when women complained about his conduct. The message was clear that the comfort and safety of women mattered less than the profits generated by powerful men. Behind the laughter and the charity work was a man who consistently used his power to make other people miserable. Number 6. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas is the sixth and final name Sally Field exposes, and this revelation may be the most explosive of all. Kirk Douglas maintained a positive public image throughout his entire life. When he died in 2020 at the age of 103, the tributes poured in celebrating his legendary career and his contributions to cinema. But Sally brings up the long-standing allegation that Kirk Douglas raped Natalie Wood when she was a teenage actress in the 1950s. This rumor has circulated in Hollywood for decades. Multiple sources have confirmed that Natalie Wood told friends and family members that a powerful actor assaulted her when she was young, but she never named him publicly during her lifetime. After Natalie Wood's death in 1981, the whispers grew louder, and many people in the industry identified Kirk Douglas as the perpetrator, but nothing was ever done about it. Kirk Douglas continued to work and be celebrated and receive Lifetime Achievement Awards while this terrible secret hung over his legacy. Sally Field never worked directly with Kirk Douglas, but she knew people who did, and she heard the stories that everyone whispered about but never said out loud. She talks about how the culture of old Hollywood enabled powerful men to commit terrible crimes and face zero consequences. Studios had entire departments dedicated to making scandals disappear. Police could be paid off. Journalists could be threatened or bribed. Victims were silenced through legal settlements or through the very real threat that speaking out would end their careers. The alleged assault of Natalie Wood represents one of the darkest secrets of Hollywood's golden age, and the fact that Kirk Douglas died without ever facing accountability for it shows just how broken the system was. What makes Sally Field's decision to name these 6 men so significant is not just the individual allegations against each of them, but what they represent about the entire system of old Hollywood. This was an era that we tend to romanticize. We watch the classic films and admire the glamorous stars and think of it as a golden age when movies were better and stars were classier. But Sally wants people to understand that underneath all that glamour was an industry built on exploitation and the abuse of power. The studio system concentrated enormous control in the hands of a very small number of men. These men could make or break careers with a single decision. If you wanted to work in Hollywood, you had to play by their rules, and those rules often involved accepting or participating in deeply unethical and illegal behavior. Women in old Hollywood were treated as property. Their bodies were not considered their own. They were expected to sleep with producers and directors and studio executives if they wanted to get roles or keep their contracts. If they complained or resisted, they were labeled as troublemakers and blacklisted from the industry. The 6 men Sally Field names were products of this system. They learned that they could get away with almost anything because their status and their profitability protected them from consequences. Burt Reynolds could emotionally abuse his girlfriend. Alfred Hitchcock could sexually harass his actresses. John Wayne could be openly racist and misogynist. Bing Crosby could beat his children. Jerry Lewis could harass women under the guise of comedy. Kirk Douglas could allegedly rape a teenage girl. And all of them continued to work and be celebrated because the system valued their contributions more than the humanity of their victims. Sally Field also emphasizes that these 6 men are just the ones she is choosing to speak about publicly. For every story she shares, there are dozens more that will never be told. Some victims did not survive to tell their stories. Others are so traumatized that they cannot speak about what happened to them. Still others signed legal agreements that prevent them from ever revealing what they experienced. The culture of silence in Hollywood ran deep, and it was enforced through both legal mechanisms and social pressure. Anyone who spoke out risked being labeled as a liar or an attention seeker, or someone trying to destroy innocent reputations. So what has changed since the golden age that Sally Field is describing? She points to several factors that have slowly shifted the culture of Hollywood. The old studio system eventually collapsed in the 1960s, and power became more distributed among independent producers and directors and actors who formed their own production companies. The women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 1970s began to challenge the idea that sexual harassment and abuse were just normal parts of doing business. Slowly and painfully over many decades, the industry began to evolve. But Sally is very clear that the progress has been incomplete and fragile. The same patterns of abuse and exploitation continue in different forms. The Me Too movement that exploded in 2017 proved that many men in Hollywood still believed they could use their positions of power to prey on vulnerable people. Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and many others were finally held accountable for behavior that had been an open secret for years. Sally sees the Me Too movement as connected to the abuses of the Golden Age. The culture that protected men like Weinstein is the same culture that protected the 6 men she is naming. It is a culture that values profit and power over basic human decency and the safety of vulnerable people. Sally Field's decision to speak out now comes from a sense of responsibility to the next generation. She has achieved everything anyone could hope for in an acting career. She has won the highest awards. She has the respect of her peers. She has financial security. She does not need anything from Hollywood anymore, which means she can tell the truth without fear of retaliation or career damage. She hopes that by sharing these difficult stories, she can honor the victims who never received justice and help prevent future generations from suffering similar fates. She wants young actors and actresses entering the industry today to know the history of the business they are joining. They need to understand that the problems they may face are not new, and that people have been fighting against these injustices for generations. The reaction to Sally Field's revelations has been predictably mixed. Many people have praised her courage and honesty. Survivors of abuse have thanked her for using her platform to speak truth to power. But there has also been backlash from people who accuse her of trying to destroy the legacies of beloved stars. Some defenders of these actors argue that we cannot judge people from the past by the standards of today. They claim that attitudes about gender and race and acceptable behavior were different back then, and that it is unfair to condemn people for acting according to the norms of their time. Sally Field firmly rejects this argument. She points out that abuse and rape and racism were wrong in the 1950s just as they are wrong today. The fact that society tolerated these behaviors and that laws did not adequately protect victims does not make the behaviors themselves acceptable. There were plenty of men in old Hollywood who managed to have successful careers without abusing women or being racist or beating their children. The 6 men she names made choices about how to treat other human beings, and they chose cruelty and violence and exploitation. They do not deserve to be excused because of the era they lived in. Sally also pushes back against the common argument that we should separate the art from the artist. She understands the appeal of this idea. Many people love the movies that these men made and do not want to feel guilty about enjoying them. But Sally believes that when we celebrate the work of men who committed terrible acts without acknowledging the harm they caused, we are sending a message about what we value as a society. We are saying that talent and fame matter more than the suffering of victims. We are saying that some people are important enough that their crimes can be overlooked or forgotten. This does not mean that we have to stop watching old movies or pretend that problematic figures made no artistic contributions. But it does mean that we need to be honest about who these people were and what they did. We can acknowledge that Alfred Hitchcock made groundbreaking films, while also acknowledging that he sexually harassed his actresses. We can recognize that John Wayne was a huge star while also recognizing that he was racist. This kind of nuanced understanding is more truthful and more ethical than either mindless celebration or complete erasure. Looking at these 6 actors, and their behavior reveals some uncomfortable truths about fame and power and how easily they can corrupt people. These were men who had everything that society tells us we should want. They were rich and famous and talented and admired by millions. Yet they chose to use their positions to hurt other people. They could have been forces for good in the world, but instead they became predators and tyrants. Their evil was not the dramatic villainy they sometimes played in movies. It was the banal, everyday cruelty of men who believed they were entitled to treat other human beings as objects that existed solely for their pleasure or convenience. Sally Field's ultimate message, despite the painful nature of her revelations, is actually one of hope. She believes that by confronting the past honestly, we can build a better future. Each person who refuses to stay silent makes it a little bit easier for the next person to speak up. Each institution that takes allegations seriously instead of protecting powerful abusers makes the whole system a little bit more just. The work is far from finished, but progress is possible if enough people commit to telling the truth and demanding accountability.